Your autobiography is called Never Have Your Dog Stuffed. You're going to have to explain that.
Well, it's really simple. I had my dog stuffed when I was about 8 years old. The poor thing died, and I really loved this dog. I had polio when I was 7, and my father brought the dog home one day to cheer me up. And I loved this dog. He loved me back too. He would just look into my eyes, and he'd let me tie his ears into knots on top of his head. He was a Cocker Spaniel. So he had long ears to start with, you know. I mean,
you didn't make them longer by pulling.
Yeah, the tying didn't do it. But we moved to a new house, and the first or second day we were there, he ate some Chinese food. We used to give him leftovers, and I guess he choked on a bone or something, and he was dead very quickly. And I was really distraught because I loved this animal. And my father thought it would be a good idea for me to get over the grief a little better by helping to bury the dog. So we went out carrying the dog between us on a blanket with some shovels and dug. And every shovelful made me sob even more. So my father really now was at a loss. He thought he was helping, and he wasn't. Now he got a new idea, which was going to make things better. He said, maybe we should have the dog stuffed. And I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know what it meant. So he said, well, take it to a taxidermist, and he'll fix him up, and then, you know, you'll always be able to keep him. So we went to a taxidermist on Hollywood Boulevard, and there were all these animals in there, little squirrels sitting up on branches. It was a very bizarre place. And the taxidermist wanted to know what the dog looked like. What kind of expression did he have on his face? And we said he was a nice dog. You know, we didn't know how to describe his face. So the taxidermist improvised. He sent him back to us with a ferocious, hideous look on his face that was so scary. We kept him in the living room, and people would come into the room and literally back out of the room. They were afraid. They thought the thing was going to leap at them. I eventually learned from that you really can't hold things in place. You know, the dog died, he was gone. You couldn't stuff his skin and keep the dog. The dog wasn't this stuffed thing. Now, that's an obvious thing to a lot of people, but it really began to mean more and more to me. And actually, the book is called that, not just because of that anecdote, but because my whole life, as I look back on it, has been an effort to find out how I can live, how I can have live experiences, how I can be more spontaneous.
Your book, your autobiography, begins with the sentence, "My mother didn't try to stab my father until I was 6." I have to say that got my attention, which is obviously...
It got my attention too.
Your mother didn't try to stab your father until you were 6. I mean, your mother's mental illness was one of the...
Oh, it was a real factor in the life of our family. My mother was schizophrenic and paranoid, and later became alcoholic. And the symptoms, that's surely there must have been some strange behavior about her early. Maybe not. Maybe the onset of that is sudden and you don't see it coming. My father and she married when they were very young, and I guess he didn't see any signs of it. But by the time I was 4 or 5 or 6, I could see signs of severe depression, certainly. And then a couple of years later, she thought that people were trying to photograph her through cracks in the wall. She thought within a year or two after that I was trying to kill her, that my father was trying to kill her. It was very tough to grow up with that.
But you presumably thought that was normal in a way.
Well, I did. I didn't know that anybody behaved differently. I didn't know that mothers weren't like that. Whenever anybody would say to me, a school friend would say, that he loved his mother, I thought, he must be lying. You know, it's not that I didn't care for her, and it's not that she didn't love me. She really loved me and was a good mother in many ways. But it was so discombobulating to be in her company all the time, to always wonder if her view of reality was in fact reality, that I couldn't understand simple mother-son love for a long time. It took me a long time to get it.
How did that leave you? Because there's anger in the book. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah. I was very angry with her for a long time. I didn't understand that she didn't choose her illness. She couldn't help it, but I didn't know that. And I wanted her to be a normal mother, or what seemed to be normal. I didn't know what normal was. But I was angry with her for not being somebody else, which of course is crazy, is silly on my part, but I didn't know any better. I was a kid.
The other part of your life, which is absolutely amazing, is in a sense, it's been a performance since you were a baby of 6 months.
Yeah.
That is extraordinary. I mean, your first role was what, at 6 months?
Well, they brought me out in a burlesque sketch, put me in a high chair. It was a schoolroom sketch. And the comics were all playing kids, and they brought me out, a real baby, and there was a bell on the high chair, and I kept banging on the bell.
Oh, you did do it? On cue or no? You just...
No, well, I don't think they'd have thought it was on cue. It was right when they got to their punchlines. I killed the joke by banging.
Oh, so you were upstaging people from 6 months.
I got the idea right away, yeah. It's not, I don't think it's a good idea to put kids on stage until they grow out of their childhood. I like the British idea very much, as long as you're going to make the decision to use children on the stage, to not let them come in for every performance, but to have three, I guess usually it's three kids spelling one another.
I suppose we should explain to people who are not entirely familiar with burlesque.
Yes.
That as a kid, you were surrounded by beautiful, mostly naked women.
Yeah, mostly naked women.
And you were aware of this?
Was I ever? You know this... Freud has this idea called latency about how I believe it's some kind of disinterest in sex at a certain age. I never went through that. If this is an actual description of life, it didn't apply to me. I was standing in the wings from the time I was 2 years old, or earlier, I guess, as soon as I could stand, watching burlesque from the wings. And burlesque was very disciplined but low-down, coarse comedians, chorus girls who were half naked, and strippers who were as naked as they could get without getting arrested by the police. Each town had a different violation that in some you couldn't show your nipples, and in others you couldn't even show your belly button. But they made up for that with the eroticism of their dancing. They were very inventive. And I was standing there watching it, and they'd prance around and take off their clothes in time to the drum beat and toss that piece of clothing into the wings. And I'm this little kid watching, and the top of the dress lands at my feet, then the bottom of the dress and the gloves. And it all was normal to me. I was very interested in it. And then the chorus girls would take me up to their dressing room and comb my hair and sort of, make me a mascot in a way. And then they'd say, "Okay, turn your back, Allie. We're going to change our clothes now." And I'd turn my back with my face in the silk costumes hanging from a hook.
So there was modesty, despite all.
There was modesty, but I'd hear the silk costumes coming on and off their bodies. I can remember this very vividly. Well, you would too if it happened to you.
Your huge career breakthrough was MASH, which every one of us of our generation remembers as this amazing TV moment when it was, for those who haven't seen it, there can't be many, but set in the Korean War, but it was transmitted during Vietnam, and everybody thought it was about Vietnam. How did you make that break? How did you get into that, become Hawkeye Pierce?
Oh, well, I had been acting on the stage for years, and a lot of people knew my work. I'd made a bunch of movies that were very unsuccessful, but people knew me from them, and they just offered me the part. I was in the Utah State Prison at the time, and not for any of my performances. I was making a movie there, and we were shooting with actual inmates, which was a very weird experience. They made me a hostage, held a razor to my throat. It was a very creepy place to be. But while I was there, they sent me the script for MASH, and I thought it was the best thing I'd read for television, but I didn't think I'd be able to do it because I had to make it in California. And I said to my wife, gee, I read this great thing, called her up, and I said, I read this great thing, but I can't do it because we live in New Jersey, and this might run a year or two, and we'd have to move. And I didn't want to take my children out of school. They were just becoming teenagers, and that was the time for them to leave us, not for us to drag them into a new setting.
You also said you were worried that the show would become a 30-minute commercial for the army.
Yeah, not so much for the Army as for war. You know, if it trivialized war, I was afraid, and there were a couple of shows that did that already.
The wacky side of being in the military.
Yeah.
But I mean, many things that were different about MASH. One was, every episode you were up to here in blood.
Right.
Because you were a surgeon.
But you know, you couldn't tell that from the pilot. And the pilot was the only thing I had read. The movie was like that, but you didn't know if they were going to sanitize it for television. In fact, the network really wanted us to sanitize it. The network said, stay out of the operating room, no blood. So in the pilot, the operating room was shot in a red light, so you couldn't tell what was bloody and what wasn't. And as soon as we got on the air, we dropped that, and you could see the blood.
Do you think, looking back on it, it was anti-war? It was part of that great shift in the American consciousness during the Vietnam period, and it made people anti-war? Because, but put it another way, it's very human, and that's what Hawkeye Pierce, you think, humanity, decency, in these terrible circumstances where people are getting limbs blown off.
Yeah, I think it was generally anti-war. You know, I have never met a general who didn't tell me that he hated war, that sending his troops into a war was the last thing he wanted to do. It always interests me that people who speak lightly about war are people who haven't ever done it. Now, I didn't ever do it, but the people I've met who have don't speak highly of it. They don't like it. So in a general way, I think this conformed to that idea. But I didn't think of it as specifically anti-Vietnam War. I thought we were telling a story about Korea. Larry Gelbart, who wrote a lot of the show, I think was deliberately using Korean stories to make a point about the war we were then involved in.
But that's why it has a resonance now, because there's a war in Iraq and war elsewhere. And you're right, in one sense, that war is war is war. It doesn't really matter where it is.
You know, stories that take place in one war have often already taken place in previous wars. In the final episode, we had a story that we had heard as happening in the Korean War. It was where a baby was among a bunch of people who were trying to escape a battleground. And they were sneaking past the enemy, but the baby was crying. And to try to quiet the baby, a mother put her hand over his mouth and the baby suffocated. It's a tragic thing. But it didn't just happen in the Korean War. I since learned that it had happened. There were stories just like that from World War II, from the Vietnam War, from you know, it happens all the time.